On the 26th of April, 1986, reactor number 4 at Chernobyl tore itself apart and poisoned an area the size of a small country. 40 years later, most of that land has been handed back to the wolves. So why are there still places inside it that no one, not even a guide in a hazmat suit, is allowed to enter? We found 10. Stay through to number 1, because what waits there is a mass of melted reactor fuel called the elephant's foot. And in 1986, standing near it would kill you in under 5 minutes. The mistake people make is to think of the zone as a single forbidden place. It is not. It is a set of forbidden places, one inside another, like rooms in a house where some doors are locked and a few have been sealed for good. We start at the edge of that house and we work inwards. Number 10. Reactor 5 and Reactor 6. A few hundred meters from the ruined reactor, 2 enormous concrete shells stand against the sky, ringed on tower cranes that have not moved since the Soviet Union still existed. Construction on the 5th and 6th reactors began in 1981. By the spring of 1986, the 5th was around 70% finished and scheduled to come online that November. Chernobyl was never meant to stop at 4 reactors. The original plan ran to 12, and these 2 were the next phase, a pair of 1,000 megawatt units that would have made this one of the largest power stations on Earth. On the morning of the disaster, 286 builders carried on working, unaware. The glow from Reactor 4 was not visible from where they stood, so they kept pouring concrete while the worst nuclear accident in history unfolded just up the road. Work stopped, then restarted that October, then stopped again. But in the spring of 1989, the project was abandoned for good, and the half-built reactors were simply left where they were. Today, the shells are among the most dangerous structures in the zone, and not because of radiation. The floors are unfinished, the staircases corroded, the lift shafts drop 10 stories into the dark. Beside them stand 2 cooling towers that were never completed, their hollow interiors now 10 times more radioactive than an ordinary city street. On the curved inner wall of one, an artist has since painted the enormous figure of a doctor bending down towards a patient, a memorial to the people who treated the dying. It is a power station halted at the exact moment its future was cancelled. But the disaster did not only cancel futures. Sometimes it swallowed the past whole. Number 9. Kopachi. If you drive south from the plant, you pass through a stretch of woodland dotted with low grassy mounds, each one marked with a small yellow sign carrying the trefoil symbol for radiation. There is no village here. There used to be. Kopachi was a farming settlement of a few hundred people, sitting closer to Reactor 4 than almost anywhere else outside Pripyat itself. After the accident, the contamination here was so severe that ordinary decontamination failed completely. So the authorities took a more drastic decision. They sent in the engineers, bulldozed the houses, and buried them where they stood. Each mound you see is a home pushed into a pit and covered over with earth. It was one of the few places in the zone where they tried to erase a village rather than evacuate it, and it did not entirely work. Burying contaminated buildings, it turned out, can drive the radioactive material down towards the groundwater, which is its own slow problem. A handful of structures were left standing. Among them a kindergarten, its small beds and dolls still inside. The rest of Kopachi is a forest growing over a graveyard of houses. You are not taken in among the mounds, and for good reason. The hotspots between them are some of the sharpest in the southern zone. Most people never hear about Kopachi at all. They go straight for the famous things, and the next place on this list was famous precisely because no one was supposed to know it existed. Number 8. Chernobyl 2. For decades, Soviet maps of this area showed a pioneer camp, a holiday spot for children. There was no camp. What stood in the forest, 6 kilometers from the power plant, was a secret military town called Chernobyl 2, built to operate one of the strangest machines of the Cold War. Rising above the trees is a wall of steel antennas, some of them more than 140 meters tall and half a kilometer wide. This was one half of the Duga over-the-horizon radar, designed in the 1970s to spot American missile launches the instant they left the ground. In the West, it had a nickname because the signal it pumped out interrupted radio broadcasts across the world with a relentless tapping sound. They called it the Russian woodpecker. Several thousand people lived and worked at Chernobyl 2, hidden behind the same security cordon that protected the power plant. But the array sat directly in the path of the fallout. And after April 1986, it was abandoned along with everything else. Every other section of the Duga system was later dismantled. This one survived because no one wanted to send work crews to take apart a contaminated structure the height of a 30-story building. So it still stands, the last of its kind, slowly rusting in a forest that was never meant to grow this thick. Climbing it is forbidden, which has never entirely stopped people trying. The woodpecker was built to watch for an attack that never came. The next site was built to make things no one was supposed to know about. Number 7. The vehicle graveyards. In the months after the explosion, an army of machines was thrown at the disaster. Trucks, bulldozers, armoured carriers, and the enormous mill helicopters that hovered over the open reactor to drop sand on the fire. Tens of thousands of vehicles. The problem with using machinery to clean up radiation is that the machinery becomes radioactive itself, and you cannot simply drive it back out into the world. So they parked it. The most famous of these graveyards was a field called Rosocha, where rows of trucks and helicopters sat rusting for years, far too contaminated to touch. For a while you could visit it. Then the visits stopped, and quietly most of the machines were dug up and reburied at a dedicated waste site, with some, it is suspected, simply stolen for scrap. If you are enjoying these, take a second to subscribe, because there is a forbidden place like this, hiding behind almost every country in Europe, and we are working through all of them. The graveyard that remains is at Buryakivka, a sealed burial ground covering more than 80 hectares, where 30 long trenches hold the worst of the machinery underground. Among the things buried there is a German remote control robot sent up to clear debris from the reactor roof, which failed within seconds when the radiation destroyed its electronics. Buryakivka is an active radioactive waste facility. There is no tour. There is a fence, and there are guards, and there is the quiet knowledge that whatever is down there will outlast everyone reading this. So that is the machinery dealt with. But what about the place that built the machines? Number 6. The Jupiter factory. On the western edge of Pripyat sits a long industrial building behind a concrete wall topped with barbed wire. Officially, the Jupiter factory made cassette recorders. 3,500 people worked here, many of them women, hired for the fine motor skills the work demanded. But the cassette recorders were a cover story. Behind the assembly lines, Jupiter produced semiconductor components for the Soviet military. And in its hidden workshops, engineers tested experimental robotic systems. Everyone in Pripyat knew the factory existed. Almost no one knew what actually happened inside it, and there is a decent chance the workers in one wing had no idea what was being built in the next. Here is the part that explains why it is still sealed off. After the disaster, when the rest of Pripyat was emptied, Jupiter did not close. Parts of it kept running until 1996, repurposed as a laboratory for testing decontamination methods. which means the flooded basement is not just abandoned, it is a former radiological laboratory. And explorers who have reached it describe boxes of a strange grey powder that turned out to contain strontium, plutonium, and a handful of other things you very much do not want near your lungs. Among the wreckage inside sits a Japanese-built robot, one of the machines brought in to help clean the reactor roof and then dumped here once its work was done. The rumours that Jupiter built nuclear weapons are almost certainly nonsense. The reality, a secret military electronics plant whose basement is now a chemistry experiment no one is managing, is unsettling enough. We are now past the halfway point, and we are getting closer to the reactor. The next place is not even in the same country. Number 5. The Polesie Reserve. Here is a fact that gets lost in almost every account of Chernobyl. Roughly 60% of the fallout did not land in Ukraine at all. It drifted north, across the border, into Belarus. And whilst the Ukrainian side of the zone became a strange sort of tourist destination, the Belarusian side simply vanished from public life. It is called the Polesie State Radio Ecological Reserve. It covers more than 2,000 square kilometers, and it is closed. Not closed in the sense of needing a guide. Closed in the sense that you need a special government permit. The military patrols the perimeter, and intruders are arrested. Before the disaster, more than 22,000 people lived here in 96 villages. All of them were evacuated, and the villages were left to rot behind the fence. With the people gone, something unexpected happened. The reserve became one of the richest wildlife habitats in Europe. European bison, brown bears, wolves, and herds of wild horses now move through the abandoned farmland, and the place holds the largest population of European pond turtles on the continent. It is a nature reserve that nobody is allowed to enjoy. A wilderness sealed behind a radiation cordon, studied by a handful of scientists and seen by almost no one else. 2 countries, 1 disaster, and on the quieter side of the border, an entire forbidden country within a country. That is the widest ring of the zone. From here, every place we visit takes us closer to Reactor 4 itself. And the closer you get, the less anyone is willing to let you stand still. Number 4. The control room. Inside the plant, down a corridor near the ruined reactor hall, there is a room full of dead instrument panels. Hundreds of switches, dials and gauges, most of them now empty sockets where the metal was stripped out for evidence and for scrap. This is the control room of reactor number 4. This is where it happened. In the early hours of the 26th of April, the night shift here ran a safety test that went catastrophically wrong. And the young engineer at these controls, Leonid Toptunov, was 25 years old when the reactor beneath his feet exploded. He died of radiation sickness within weeks. For years, the room was sealed. Then, shortly before the war, the plant began allowing a strict, escorted version of access. You could stand in the control room of Reactor 4, but only for a few minutes, only in a protective suit, mask and gloves, and only with a dosimeter clicking the whole time. The reason for the time limit is not theatrical. There are hot spots behind those panels where the readings are still high enough that lingering is genuinely unwise. It is the one place on this list where you can stand at the exact spot where the disaster began, and they will not let you stay. Which brings us back to something I mentioned at the start. The zone is not one forbidden place. It is rings inside rings. And the next ring is, by some measures, the most poisoned ground on the planet. Number 3, the Red Forest. Directly downwind of the reactor is a patch of woodland that took the heaviest dose of fallout of anywhere in the zone. The pine trees absorbed so much radiation that their needles turned a deep rust red before they died. which is how it got its name. The liquidators bulldozed most of the dead forest and buried it in trenches, then planted saplings over the top. A new forest grew. But underneath it, the buried trees are still there, still hot, and the red forest remains one of the most contaminated open landscapes anywhere on Earth. You are not permitted to walk into it, and the warnings here are not for show. This is the place that delivered one of the strangest episodes of the recent war. When Russian forces seized the zone in February 2022, on the first day of the full-scale invasion, their armoured columns drove directly through the red forest, throwing up clouds of radioactive dust. And some soldiers dug trenches and foxholes into the contaminated soil without protective gear. Ukrainian officials later released images of the diggings. Reports that the troops fell seriously ill were widely circulated, though they were never independently confirmed, and at least one tour guide later admitted he had exaggerated the radiation sickness story to frighten them. The documented part is bad enough. Soldiers in 2022 chose to fortify the single most radioactive forest on the continent. Stay with me because we are almost at number 1, the place that gives off more danger than everything else on this list combined. But first, the building that received the very first victims. Number 2, Pripyat Hospital number 126. On the night of the disaster, the firefighters who climbed onto the burning reactor roof did not know they were being irradiated. When they collapsed, they were brought here to the city hospital, a complex of 5 6-story buildings whose roof still carries a Soviet slogan reading that the health of the people is the wealth of the country. The doctors and nurses worked through the night on men whose burns made no sense to them. And as they cut away the firefighters' uniforms, the staff had no idea that the clothing itself was lethally radioactive. Mere contact with it burned their hands. 237 people were diagnosed with acute radiation sickness in the weeks that followed. 28 of them died within 3 months. And then there is the basement. The contaminated uniforms, the boots, the helmets, the gloves, all of it was carried down and dumped in the cellar, where it has stayed ever since. It is widely considered the single most dangerous spot in all of Pripyat. The clothing in those rooms still reads 2 to 3 Roentgens an hour, decades on. Visitors were taken through the wards above, where the broken glass and scattered medical records lie thick on the floor. But the basement is forbidden outright. So many people tried to creep down for a photograph that the authorities eventually poured a ton of sand into the stairwell to seal it. Somewhere under that sand, a fireman's tunic from April 1986 is still giving off a dose. And the men who wore that tunic were fighting the fire that produced the thing waiting at number 1. Number 1, the elephant's foot. Beneath Reactor 4, in a maintenance corridor on the lower levels, there is a mass of solidified black material that looks a little like the wrinkled foot of an elephant. That is where the name comes from. It is the most infamous object the disaster produced, and it is the one place in the entire zone that is permanently, physically, forever off limits. When the reactor exploded, the nuclear fuel did not stay in the core. It melted, mixed with sand, concrete and steel, and flowed downwards through the building as a lava that has no natural equivalent on this planet. Scientists call the substance corium. When it cooled and hardened in the basement, it formed several masses, and the largest of them earned the nickname. It was not discovered until December of 1986. The 2 men who found it were searching the lower corridors when their dosimeter raced past 3,000 Roentgens an hour and broke. They left it on the stairs and ran. The mass was so hard and so dense that when scientists later needed a sample to study, the only way to break a piece loose was to fire a Kalashnikov at it. At the time, the surface of the elephant's foot was giving off something close to 10,000 Roentgens an hour, enough to deliver a lethal dose in roughly 3 to 5 minutes. The often reproduced photograph of a man standing beside it was taken 10 years later in 1996, when the radiation had dropped to a fraction of its original strength. The grain and the streaks across that image are not a fault in the camera. They are the radiation itself, fogging the film as the shutter opened. The elephant's foot has cooled with the decades, but it has not become safe, and it will not be safe for centuries. Today it sits sealed beneath the new safe confinement, a vast steel arch that cost more than €2 billion and was slid into place over the reactor in 2016, built to last 100 years. No tourist will ever stand before the elephant's foot. No one will. It is the dead heart of the zone. The reason all the other doors on this list are locked. Walled now behind the largest movable structure ever built. And in February 2025, that structure was hit by a drone. Ukraine blamed Russia. Russia denied it. By the end of the year, the international nuclear watchdog confirmed the strike had punched through the arch and that it could no longer fully do the one job it was built for. There are places in Europe you cannot visit because they are sacred, and places you cannot visit because no one is left to let you in. Chernobyl is the rarest kind, a place you cannot visit because the ground itself has been sentenced, and the sentence has centuries left to run. The wolves have the wilderness now, the turtles have the marshes, the bison have the farmland. And in a corridor beneath Reactor 4, sealed under a wounded steel arch, the elephant's foot goes on quietly, doing the only thing it has ever done, which is wait. It will still be there long after the war that now surrounds it is history. Long after the arch is rebuilt or fails. Long after everyone who remembers 1986 is gone. The isotopes inside it will not fall to anything like a safe level for centuries, a span of time that makes every fence and every guard on this list look temporary. That is the thing about Chernobyl. We built something that will outlast us, and it is the one thing we most wish we had not. Subscribe, and we will keep walking the perimeter fences of Europe together, one forbidden place at a time. Thank you.